Hi. In the chapter The Shaping of a Crusade, in This Freedom Whence by John Wesley Bready, we're in the section where Bready is discussing the violent, often violent, and all the time virulent opposition to Methodism in its first decades. For more than 30 years, references to mob interference form a feature of Wesley's journal. And fiercest of all, the beasts of the people, were the lions called gentlemen. The record for September 19th, 1769, is amusing and revealing. Quote, "The beasts of the people were tolerably quiet till I had nearly finished my sermon. They then lifted up their voice, especially one called a gentleman, who had filled his pockets with rotten eggs. But a young man, coming unawares, clapped his hands on each side and smashed them all at once. In an instant he was perfume all over, though it was not so sweet as balsam." End of quote. Some gentlemen magistrates went the length of advising mobs to do what you will with the Methodists, so you break no bones. Others issued general warrants for the arrest of itinerant preachers, while more than once strutting, fuming gentlemen contracted with mobs to drive all that were called Methodists out of their district. The journal record of February 6, 1744 is peculiarly illuminating. After months of sporadic terrorism and looting, a mob, hired by their betters and bound by an oath to plunder all the Methodists in Wednesbury, set out on Shrove Tuesday to complete their design. The attack was calculated, wanton, and ruthless. Assaulting all the homes of those who were called Methodists, they first broke all their windows, suffering neither glass, lead, nor frames to remain therein. Then all the tables, chairs, chests of drawers, with whatever was not easily removable, they dashed to pieces, particularly shop goods and furniture of every kind. While non-breakable, such as feather beds, they cut in pieces and strewed about the room. And so the valiant fellows continued. Wearing apparel, the things that were of value or easily saleable, they carried away, every man loading himself with as much as he could well carry, or whatever he liked best. Finally, they came to the house of William Sitch, whose wife was lying in. But that was all one. They pulled her away her bed too, and cut it in pieces. Following this valorous act, some of the gentlemen who had set the mob to work, or threatened to turn away Collier or Ruiner, or Miner rather, out of their service, that did not come and do his part, now drew up a paper for those of the society to sign, importing that they would never invite or receive any Methodist preacher more. On this condition, they told them that they would stop the mob at once, otherwise they must take what followed. This paper they offered to several, but they declared, one and all, "We have already lost all our goods, and nothing more can follow but the loss of our lives, which we will lose too, rather than wrong our consciences." So the mad orgy continued. The Methodists offered no resistance, for they knew resistance would only jeopardize the honor of their womenfolk to this gentleman-led mob. Before the exploits of this Shrove Tuesday were over, the houses of some hundreds of Wesley's disciples in Wednesbury resembled a devastated area. Not only had their houses been broken up, their furniture cut to pieces, and their portable goods looted, even their livestock had been driven off. Most of them, indeed, were stripped of all they had in the world. Our dictator-ridden age, because this is written in the late 1930s, our dictator-ridden age is familiar with the art of doping news for propaganda purposes. But was ever a war dispatch more diabolically contorted than the following report of the above riot? A report which may still be read in the British Museum Library from the files of the London Evening Post of February 18th, 1744. Quote, "By a private letter from Staffordshire, this news item reads, 'We had advice of an insurrection of the people called Methodists, who upon some pretended insults from the church party have assembled themselves in a riotous manner, and having committed several outrages, they proceeded at last to burn the house of one of their adversaries.'" End of quote. This report is worthy of the valiant gentleman who inspired and managed the Wednesbury assault. It is the more understandable, too, when it is remembered that most 18th century journalists, editors, and writers were as much in the pockets of gouty, irascible patrons as were the parish priests. Wesley's superb courage, his overawing composure, his humor and affability succeeded finally in subduing even the bestiality of the 18th century mob. For his journal note, September 16, 1743, many parallels may be cited. Quote, "In the evening, as I was preaching at St. Ives, Satan began to fight for his kingdom. The mob of the town burst into the room and created much disturbance, roaring and striking those that stood in the way, as though Legion himself possessed them. I would fain have persuaded our people to stand still, but the zeal of some of them and the fear of others had no ears, so that finding the uproar increase, I went into the midst and brought the head of the mob up with me to the desk. I received but one blow on the side of the head, after which we reasoned the case, till he grew milder and milder, and at length undertook to quiet his companions." End of quote. Wesley the evangelist was a man possessed of amazing grace. Never did he lose his temper, and always was he prepared to endure a blow if the dealing of it would relieve the hysteria of his assailant. Repeatedly, when struck by a stone, he quietly wiped away the blood and went on preaching without so much as a frown on his face. He loved his enemies, and do what they would, they could not make him discourteous or angry. It's no exaggeration to say that Wesley instilled into the English people a new and highly Christian conception of courage. The swaggering, bullying, animal species of courage so characteristic of his age made no appeal to him. His was a product of the Spirit, and ere his earthly race was run, something of the majesty of that same spiritual courage was reflected, even in the humblest Methodist societies all over the land. In danger, Wesley had taught his followers to think of Christ before Pilate, of the Son of God before a crucifying mob. Thus it was that Wesley's serenity first broke and later won the heart of many a mob leader. Thus it was, too, that many a one-time brute was transformed into a saintly class leader and shepherd of souls. This miraculous grace was the power which finally conquered the 18th century mob. Mr. Vulliamy, in words of rare insight, says, quote, "It was not courage alone that saved Wesley. He was preserved by a tranquil dignity, by cool, steady, and courteous behavior, by the entire absence of malice and anger, but above all, by those peculiar graces and powers which accompany a man of God." The attacks on the movement by heady society leaders were more subtle but not less vicious than those of squires, clergymen, magistrates, and mobs. Contemporary literature bristles with demonstrations of this truth, but we quote only the Duchess of Buckingham, illegitimate daughter of James II. Addressing the Countess of Huntingdon, one of the few in well-bred society who early supported the revival, the Duchess wrote, quote, "I thank your ladyship for the information concerning the Methodist preaching. These doctrines are most repulsive and strongly tinctured with impertinence and disrespect toward their superiors, in perpetually endeavoring to level all ranks, to do away with all distinctions, as it is monstrous to be told that you have a heart as sinful as the common wretches that crawl on the earth. This is highly offensive and insulting, and I cannot but wonder that your ladyship should relish any sentiments so much at variance with high rank and good breeding." Next time, necessity creates initiative.